The glass shattered against the marble floor, and every head in the grand hall turned at once. Elena stood frozen for only a second before her temper took over. Red wine spread across the white tile like a wound opening on the ground, and a few drops had landed directly on her polished black shoe. She looked up at the man who had bumped into her, a stranger dressed so plainly that he looked like he had wandered into the wrong building by mistake. "Do you have any idea how expensive these shoes are?" she snapped, her voice cutting through the low music and murmured conversations of the event. The man said nothing. He simply looked at her with calm, steady eyes, the kind of eyes that did not flinch, even when a room full of wealthy guests turned to stare. Elena had been working as a waitress for 6 years, and in that time, she had learned to smile through insults, swallow her pride, and carry trays until her arms ached. But tonight, something inside her cracked. She was tired of being invisible, tired of being the person nobody noticed unless something went wrong, tired of apologizing for things that were never her fault. "Kneel down," she said, pointing at her shoe, "and clean it. Now." A gasp rippled through the small crowd that had gathered near the buffet table. Some guests exchanged uncomfortable glances. A woman in a green dress covered her mouth in shock. But nobody stepped forward to stop what was happening. Nobody dared to interrupt Elena, whose sharp tongue was well known among the staff, and nobody wanted to challenge a paying guest either, especially not for a man who looked like he did not belong among the wealthy crowd in the first place. The man knelt. He did not argue. He did not explain himself. He simply lowered himself to one knee, took the small cloth napkin from the table beside him, and wiped the spilled wine from the tip of Elena's shoe with slow, careful movements, as if this humiliation meant nothing to him at all. Elena watched him do it, her chin lifted high, her arms crossed over her chest. For a moment, she felt a strange satisfaction, the kind that comes from finally being the one in control after years of being controlled. She did not know his name. She did not care. To her, he was just another careless guest who had ruined the shine on her shoes minutes before her shift was supposed to end. When he finished, he rose to his feet, straightened his simple gray jacket, and looked at her one more time. There was no anger in his expression, no embarrassment, nothing that Elena could read at all. He simply nodded once, turned, and walked toward the exit of the hall without another word. The music started again. The guests slowly returned to their conversations, though a few continued to whisper and glance toward Elena with expressions she could not quite understand. Some looked impressed. Others looked deeply uncomfortable, as if they had just witnessed something that should never have happened. Elena exhaled and reached down to smooth the front of her uniform. She told herself she had done nothing wrong. People spilled things on her all the time, and no one ever apologized to her. Why should this be any different? She had simply asked for what she deserved, and for once, someone had actually listened. She did not know that behind the heavy curtains near the stage, her manager, a tall, nervous man named Gareth, had gone pale the moment he recognized the guest, who had just knelt on the floor of his event hall. Gareth had spent the last 3 weeks organizing this private gathering, one of the most important nights of his career, a chance to build connections with some of the wealthiest and most influential people in the region. He had memorized every guest list, every seating arrangement, every important face that might walk through those doors. And the moment he saw the plainly dressed man kneel down in front of Elena, his stomach dropped. He rushed toward the back office the second the crowd's attention shifted away, his hands trembling as he pulled out his phone and dialed a number he had saved only for emergencies. The voice on the other end answered quickly. "Tell me." "She did not just do what I think she did," the voice said. Gareth swallowed hard. "I don't know what to say. She didn't recognize him. Nobody was supposed to recognize him. That was the entire point of tonight." Gareth's hands shook as he sat down at his desk, staring blankly at the wall. He had heard rumors, quiet ones passed between event coordinators and hospitality managers, about important visitors who sometimes attended gatherings without any announcement, without security, without the usual fanfare that surrounded people of great importance. He had never imagined he would actually witness one of these visits firsthand, and certainly never imagined it would end this way. "What happens now?" Gareth asked quietly. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Now we wait and see what he decides to do." Elena, unaware of the conversation happening just a few rooms away, finished her shift like any other night. She collected empty glasses, wiped down tables, and helped clear the hall once the last guests had left. Her feet ached from standing for hours, and her mind was already thinking about the long bus ride home and the small apartment waiting for her. Quiet and empty, the way it always was. She had grown used to loneliness. Her parents lived far away in a small town she rarely visited anymore, and her closest friend from childhood had moved abroad 2 years ago, leaving Elena with nothing but memories of a life that felt increasingly distant. Work had become her entire world, not because she loved it, but because it filled the hours that would otherwise feel unbearably empty. As she stepped outside into the cool night air, she barely noticed a black car parked quietly across the street, its windows tinted, its engine silent. She did not notice the man sitting inside, watching her walk toward the bus stop with an expression that was difficult to name, somewhere between curiosity and quiet reflection. The bus arrived a few minutes later, and Elena climbed aboard, taking her usual seat near the back, resting her head against the cool glass of the window. She replayed the events of the night in her mind, the wine spilling across her shoe, the stranger's calm silence, the way the entire hall had gone quiet as he knelt down without protest. There was something about it that unsettled her now that the adrenaline had faded, though she could not quite understand why. Most people would have argued. Most people would have apologized half-heartedly and walked away with an irritated glance. But he had said nothing at all. He had simply done what she asked, without hesitation, without pride, without even a flicker of anger crossing his face. It was strange, and the strangeness of it lingered in her mind, long after the bus pulled away from the curb. She told herself it did not matter. He was just another wealthy guest who could afford to lose a little dignity for one night. People like him never truly suffered consequences for anything. He would go home to some grand house, forget the entire incident by morning, and continue living his comfortable life without a single thought about the tired waitress who had humiliated him in front of a room full of strangers. She had no idea how wrong she was. The next morning, Elena woke up to the sound of her phone buzzing against the nightstand. She groaned, reaching for it with half-closed eyes, expecting a message from her manager about her schedule for the week. Instead, she found an unfamiliar number, along with a message that made no sense to her at first. The message asked her to confirm her identity before providing further details about an official notice that would arrive later that day. Confused, she sat up in bed, rubbing her eyes, wondering if this was some kind of scam targeting hospitality workers. She had heard about such things before, messages designed to steal personal information from people who worked long hours and were too tired to think clearly. She ignored it and got ready for her day, assuming it was nothing important. But as she walked to the small kitchen of her apartment to make coffee, she noticed something through the window that made her pause. A car, sleek and dark, was parked directly outside her building, and a man in a formal suit stood beside it, looking up toward her window, as if he had been waiting for her to appear. Her heart began to race. She had never seen a car like that in her neighborhood before, not once in the 3 years she had lived there. She quickly stepped back from the window, her mind spinning with possibilities, none of them comforting. A knock came at her door only a few minutes later, firm but polite. Elena hesitated before answering, her hand trembling slightly as she turned the lock. When she opened the door, she found the same man from outside standing before her, holding a sealed envelope with a gold emblem pressed into the wax seal. "Elena Whitfield?" he asked, his voice formal and precise. She nodded slowly, unable to find her voice. "You have been summoned," he said, extending the envelope toward her, "to appear before His Majesty, King Alaric, at the Royal Palace, 3 days from today." Elena stared at the envelope in his hand, as if it might burn her fingers if she touched it. The words did not make sense at first, tangled together in her mind, like a sentence spoken in a foreign language. A king, a summons, her name. None of it connected into anything she could understand. "There must be some mistake," she finally managed to say. "I don't know any king." The man's expression remained unreadable, professional and calm, the same way the stranger from the party had looked the night before. "There is no mistake. You are required to appear. Failure to do so will result in further complications." Elena took the envelope with shaking hands, watching as the man turned and walked back toward the waiting car without another word. She stood in her doorway long after the car had disappeared down the street, the envelope heavy in her hands, though it weighed nothing at all. She closed the door slowly and walked back into her small apartment, sitting down at the edge of her bed as she broke the seal with trembling fingers. Inside was a single sheet of thick, cream-colored paper, written in elegant handwriting that felt entirely out of place in her modest life. The letter confirmed everything the man had said. She was to appear at the royal palace in 3 days, dressed appropriately, prepared to answer for an incident that had occurred the previous evening at a private gathering. There was no explanation of what would happen once she arrived, no indication of whether this was punishment or something else entirely. Elena's mind raced back to the man who had knelt before her, the calm stranger in the plain gray jacket, the silence in his eyes as he wiped the wine from her shoe without a single word of protest. She thought of the way the entire hall had gone quiet, the way even her manager had looked pale and frightened afterward, though she had brushed it off at the time as simple nervousness from a stressful night. Her stomach twisted with dread as the truth began to settle over her, cold and undeniable. The man she had humiliated in front of an entire room of strangers was not just another wealthy guest attending a private event. He was King Alaric himself, ruler of a kingdom whose name she had only ever heard mentioned in news broadcasts and history lessons, a man whose power stretched far beyond anything she could have imagined the night before. And she had ordered him to kneel. She had mocked him, insulted him, humiliated him in front of dozens of witnesses, all without knowing who he truly was. Now she had 3 days to prepare herself for whatever consequences awaited her at the palace. 3 days to imagine every terrible outcome her mind could conjure. 3 days of sleepless nights, spent wondering if she had just ruined her entire life over a single pair of shoes. She did not eat that day, she barely slept that night. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw his calm expression staring back at her, unreadable and steady, the same expression he had worn while kneeling on the cold marble floor. By the second day, panic had fully taken hold. She called her manager, hoping for some kind of explanation, some reassurance that this was all some strange misunderstanding that could be resolved quietly. Instead, Gareth's voice on the other end of the line sounded just as frightened as she felt. "I don't know what to tell you," he admitted. "I didn't even recognize him myself until it was too late. This has never happened before. Whatever happens, please, just do exactly what they ask of you." His words did nothing to calm her fears. If anything, they made everything feel more real, more dangerous, more impossible to escape. She thought about running, about disappearing somewhere far away where no summons could reach her, but she knew such thoughts were foolish. A king's reach extended far beyond anything a waitress with a small apartment and an empty bank account could ever hope to outrun. On the third morning, Elena stood in front of her small mirror, staring at her reflection with red, tired eyes. She had chosen the only formal dress she owned, a simple navy blue piece she had worn to a cousin's wedding years ago. It felt embarrassingly plain compared to what she imagined the palace would require, but it was all she had. She thought about the man kneeling before her, the silence in his eyes, the strange calm that had unsettled her even in the moment of her own anger. She thought about the way he had risen afterward, nodded once, and walked away without a single word of protest or warning. What kind of man did that? What kind of king allowed himself to be humiliated without revealing his identity, without demanding respect, without punishing her on the spot? The questions circled endlessly in her mind as the black car arrived outside her building once again, this time to take her toward a fate she could not begin to predict. As she stepped into the vehicle, her hands trembling in her lap, Elena had no idea that the events about to unfold would change the entire course of her life. She had no idea that the calm, silent stranger she had mocked without mercy would soon ask her a question that would strip away every wall she had built around her heart, or that the answer she gave would set into motion a story far greater than either of them could have imagined on that ordinary, unremarkable night. The car pulled away from the curb, carrying her toward the palace gates, toward a king who had not forgotten her cruelty, and toward a truth that would soon reveal itself in ways she never could have prepared for. The palace gates rose higher than any building Elena had ever stood before, Iron and gold twisted together in patterns that seemed to glow, even under the pale morning sky. She sat frozen in the back seat of the car as it slowed to a stop, her heart pounding so loudly she was certain the driver could hear it. A guard approached the window, exchanged a few quiet words with the driver, and then stepped back, allowing the heavy gates to open with a slow, mechanical groan. Elena watched through the glass as the car rolled forward into a courtyard lined with tall white pillars and gardens, so perfectly trimmed they looked almost unreal, like something painted rather than grown. She had seen pictures of the royal palace before, glimpses on television during official announcements or holiday broadcasts, but nothing had prepared her for the reality of it. Everything felt enormous, overwhelming, designed to remind visitors of their own smallness the moment they stepped through the gates. The car finally stopped in front of a wide staircase leading up to massive wooden doors. A woman in a formal gray uniform waited at the top of the steps, her expression polite but unreadable, much like everyone else Elena had encountered since receiving the summons 3 days earlier. "Miss Whitfield," the woman said as Elena stepped out of the car, her legs shaking slightly beneath her. "Please follow me." Elena nodded, unable to trust her own voice, and followed the woman up the staircase and through the enormous doors into a hall that seemed to stretch endlessly in every direction. Marble floors gleamed beneath crystal chandeliers, and portraits of former rulers lined the walls, their painted eyes seeming to follow her as she walked past. She thought about turning back more than once during that long walk through the palace corridors. Every instinct in her body told her to run, to escape while she still could, but she knew there was nowhere to run to. She had received an official summons from the crown itself, and ignoring it would only make her situation far worse than it already was. They passed through several more halls, each more magnificent than the last, before finally arriving at a pair of tall doors, guarded by 2 soldiers, standing perfectly still on either side. The woman in gray turned to Elena, offering the first hint of sympathy she had shown since their meeting began. "His Majesty is waiting inside," she said quietly. "Answer honestly, and do not be afraid to speak your mind. He values honesty above all else." Before Elena could ask what that meant, the doors opened, and she found herself standing at the entrance of a throne room unlike anything she had ever imagined. The ceiling stretched far above her, painted with images of clouds and golden light. Long red carpets ran from the entrance, all the way to a raised platform at the far end of the room, where a throne of dark wood and gold trim sat beneath tall arched windows. And there, seated upon that throne, dressed now in formal royal attire instead of the plain gray jacket she remembered, sat the man she had humiliated 3 nights before. King Alaric looked different now, more commanding, more powerful, surrounded by an aura of authority that had been completely hidden beneath his disguise at the private gathering. Yet his eyes remained the same, calm and steady, watching her with the same quiet intensity she remembered from the moment he had knelt before her. Elena's legs carried her forward on their own, though her mind screamed at her to stop, to turn around, to find some way to escape the inevitable confrontation waiting at the end of that long red carpet. She stopped a respectful distance from the throne, lowering her eyes, unsure of what was expected of her in this moment. "Elena Whitfield," the king said, his voice carrying easily across the vast room despite its quiet tone. "Do you know why you have been summoned here today?" She swallowed hard before answering. "I believe so, Your Majesty." "And what do you believe that reason to be?" Elena forced herself to lift her eyes, meeting his gaze directly, though every part of her wanted to look away. "Because of what I did to you 3 nights ago. Because I did not know who you were, and I treated you with disrespect that you did not deserve." A long silence followed her words, stretching uncomfortably across the throne room. A few advisors standing near the edges of the platform exchanged uneasy glances, clearly expecting a harsher response from her, some plea for mercy or desperate apology, rather than the plain acknowledgement she had offered instead. "Do you regret your actions?" the king finally asked. Elena hesitated. She could have lied easily in that moment, could have fallen to her knees and begged for forgiveness the way she assumed he wanted her to, but something about his steady gaze made lying feel impossible, as if he would see through any false words the moment they left her lips. "I regret not knowing who you were," she said carefully, "but I do not regret asking to be treated with respect. even if I did not know I was speaking to a king at the time. Another silence followed, longer than the first. Elena's heart pounded so loudly she was certain everyone in the room could hear it. She braced herself for anger, for punishment, for some declaration of consequences that would follow her for the rest of her life. Instead, the king rose from his throne and descended the few steps toward her, stopping only a short distance away, close enough that she could see the same calm steadiness in his eyes that had unsettled her from the very beginning. "Tell me why you spoke to me the way you did that night," he said, his voice softer now, though still carrying enough authority to fill the entire room. "Not what you think I want to hear, the truth." Elena's throat tightened. She had not expected this question, had not prepared any answer for something so personal, so exposing. She thought about lying again, about offering some simple excuse about exhaustion or stress from a long shift, but the way he looked at her, patient and unwavering, made her feel as though he already knew any lie she might offer would be worthless. "I have spent my entire life being invisible," she began slowly, her voice trembling slightly despite her best efforts to remain composed. "People look through me, not at me. They spill things on me. They blame me for things that are not my fault. They treat me as though I exist only to serve them without complaint. That night, for the first time in years, I had power over someone. I do not have an excuse for what I did, Your Majesty, but that is the truth of why I did it." The king studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable, before finally speaking again. "Many people have knelt before me throughout my life, Elena. Advisors, nobles, even foreign leaders seeking favor. Do you know how many of them spoke to me with the same honesty you have just shown?" Elena shook her head slowly, unsure of what answer he expected. "Very few," he said. "Most people who kneel before power do so out of fear, or ambition, or the hope of gaining something in return. You knelt no one, Elena Whitfield. You demanded that I kneel instead, without knowing who I was, without calculating any advantage for yourself. That kind of honesty is rare in my world, rarer than you might imagine." Elena did not know how to respond. She had expected punishment, had spent 3 sleepless nights imagining every possible consequence, and instead she found herself standing before a king who seemed almost fascinated by her cruelty, rather than offended by it. "I do not understand," she finally admitted. "Are you not angry with me?" The king allowed the faintest hint of a smile to cross his face, so brief that Elena almost missed it entirely. "I have been angry before, Elena. Anger is simple. What you have given me is something far more complicated to process." He turned then, walking slowly back toward his throne, though he did not sit down immediately. Instead, he stood beside it, looking out over the vast throne room, as if considering something carefully before speaking again. "I attended that gathering 3 nights ago, disguised deliberately," he explained. "It is a practice I engage in more often than my advisors would prefer, visiting events and public spaces without revealing my identity, observing how people treat those they believe hold no power or influence over their lives. It reveals more about a person's true character than any formal meeting ever could." Elena's mind raced as she processed his words. So this was some kind of test. "In a sense, yes, though I did not expect the results I received from you specifically." He paused, studying her again with that same unreadable expression. Most people who believe they are speaking to someone beneath their station show either indifference or cruelty in small, forgettable ways. You showed both, quite dramatically, in front of a room full of witnesses. Shame flooded through Elena's chest, hot and uncomfortable. "I am sorry for embarrassing you, Your Majesty." "I did not say I was embarrassed," the king replied simply. "I said your actions were memorable. There is a difference." Elena did not know what to make of his response. Nothing about this conversation was following the path she had expected, and the uncertainty left her feeling more unsettled than any punishment could have. "What happens to me now?" she finally asked, unable to bear the tension of not knowing any longer. The king considered her question for a long moment before answering. "For now, nothing happens. You are free to return home." Relief washed over Elena so suddenly that her knees nearly buckled beneath her. She had expected imprisonment, fines, perhaps even the loss of her job entirely, and instead she was simply being allowed to walk away as though nothing had happened at all. However, the king continued, and Elena's relief immediately tightened back into anxious uncertainty. I would like to speak with you again. Not as punishment, but as conversation. There are few people in my life who speak to me without calculation or fear. Elena Whitfield. And I find myself curious to understand more about the woman who demanded a king kneel before her without knowing his crown. Elena stared at him, unable to fully comprehend what he was suggesting. You want to see me again? I do. Why? The king's expression remained calm, though something flickered behind his eyes that Elena could not quite name, something that felt almost like genuine curiosity rather than royal obligation. Perhaps I will explain that another time. For now, know that you are free to leave, and that a formal invitation will be sent to you within the week, should you choose to accept it. Elena left the throne room in a daze, her mind spinning with confusion as the woman in gray guided her back through the long palace corridors toward the waiting car outside. She could not understand what had just happened, could not make sense of a king who seemed more intrigued by her honesty than offended by her cruelty. As the car carried her back toward her small apartment, Elena stared out the window at the passing streets, replaying every word of their conversation over and over in her mind. She thought about his calm eyes, his steady voice, the strange stillness he carried even in moments that would have provoked anger in almost anyone else. She did not know what to expect from whatever invitation might arrive in the coming days. She did not know why a king would want to spend time with a waitress who had humiliated him in front of strangers, or what kind of conversation could possibly bridge the impossible distance between their two worlds. But for the first time in longer than she could remember, Elena felt something other than exhaustion and invisibility settling in her chest. She felt seen, truly seen, in a way that both terrified and fascinated her all at once. Whatever happened next, she knew her life had already begun to change in ways she could not yet fully understand. A week passed before the invitation arrived, though to Elena, it felt like an entire lifetime had stretched between the moment she left the palace and the morning she found another sealed envelope waiting outside her door. She had spent those 7 days in a strange state of suspended waiting, unable to focus properly at work, unable to sleep through a single night without her mind circling back to the throne room and the calm, unreadable eyes of the king who had asked her to return. Gareth had noticed the change in her almost immediately. He watched her carry trays with distracted hands, mishear orders that had never confused her before, and stare blankly into space during moments when she should have been focused on her work. He did not ask questions, though she could see the curiosity burning behind his cautious glances. Word of what had happened at the royal palace had not spread publicly, but rumors moved quickly among the small circle of event staff who had witnessed the original incident, and Elena knew it was only a matter of time before more people began to whisper about her strange connection to the crown. When the second envelope finally arrived, Elena opened it, with hands that trembled less than they had the first time, though her heart still pounded with the same nervous uncertainty. Inside, the letter was shorter than the summons had been, written in the same elegant handwriting, though the tone felt entirely different this time. It was not a command. It was an invitation, phrased with a politeness that surprised her, asking if she would be willing to join King Alaric for a private conversation the following evening, should she choose to accept. She read the letter 3 times before setting it down on her small kitchen table, staring at it as though it might transform into something else if she looked away and back again. Part of her wanted to refuse, to write back, and explain that she was simply a waitress, with nothing meaningful to offer someone of his position, that this entire situation had already extended far beyond anything reasonable. But another part of her, quieter and more persistent, could not stop thinking about the way he had looked at her in the throne room, patient and curious, as though she were a puzzle he genuinely wanted to understand. In the end, she accepted. The following evening, a car arrived to collect her once again, though this time the atmosphere felt different, less like an arrest and more like an uncertain first step into unfamiliar territory. She had chosen her clothing more carefully this time, though she still felt embarrassingly plain compared to the grandeur she knew awaited her at the palace. She told herself it did not matter. If the king truly wanted honesty from her, then honesty would have to include her own modest reality, without pretense or apology. She was led this time not to the throne room, but to a smaller, quieter chamber, tucked away in a wing of the palace she had not seen during her previous visit. The room was warmer somehow, less imposing, furnished with soft chairs arranged near a large window overlooking the palace gardens. A fire crackled gently in a stone fireplace, and the light inside felt golden and calm rather than sharp and formal. King Alaric was already seated when she entered, dressed more simply than he had been during their first meeting, though still unmistakably regal in his bearing. He rose when she entered, a gesture that surprised her given his position, and gestured toward the empty chair across from him. "Thank you for coming," he said, his voice carrying the same steady calm she remembered. Elena sat carefully, unsure of the proper etiquette for a situation like this, uncertain whether she should speak first or wait for him to guide the conversation. "I was not certain I should," she admitted honestly. "I still do not understand why you wanted to see me again." "Curiosity," he said simply, settling back into his own chair. "As I mentioned before, few people speak to me without calculation. I find myself wanting to understand more about the woman who did not know how to calculate at all." "That makes it sound like a flaw," Elena said, a hint of her old sharpness returning despite her nervousness. "Perhaps it is," the king replied, though there was no judgment in his tone. "Or perhaps it is simply rare, and rare things tend to draw attention, regardless of whether they are flaws or gifts." They spoke for nearly an hour that evening, though Elena could hardly believe it when she later realized how much time had passed. Alaric asked about her life with genuine interest, about her childhood in a small town far from the capital, about the years she had spent working in hospitality, about the loneliness that had settled into her apartment since her closest friend moved abroad. She found herself answering more honestly than she had intended, drawn out by his patient questions and the strange sense that he was truly listening rather than simply waiting for his turn to speak. In return, he told her fragments of his own life, though far less freely than she had shared her own. He spoke of the weight of ruling a kingdom, of advisors who constantly sought his favor, of a childhood spent being trained for leadership before he had even understood what leadership truly meant. He mentioned, briefly, that he had lost his mother when he was young, and that his father, though a capable ruler, had never been particularly warm or affectionate toward him. Elena listened carefully, surprised by the vulnerability hidden beneath his composed exterior, a vulnerability she suspected very few people had ever been allowed to witness. "Why tell me this?" she finally asked, unable to hold back her curiosity any longer. "You barely know me. I insulted you in front of strangers. Why trust me with any of this?" Alaric considered her question for a long moment before answering. "Trust is not something I offer easily, Elena, but you have already seen me at my most humiliated, kneeling on a marble floor in front of people who whispered and stared. There is very little left for me to hide from you that could embarrass me further." Elena felt a strange warmth spread through her chest at his words, though she quickly pushed the feeling aside, reminding herself of the impossible distance between their two worlds. Whatever curiosity he felt toward her now would surely fade eventually, and she could not allow herself to become attached to something that could never last. Over the following weeks, more invitations arrived, each one bringing her back to that same quiet chamber overlooking the palace gardens. Their conversations grew longer, more comfortable, drifting easily between serious topics and lighter moments that occasionally drew genuine laughter from both of them. Elena began to notice small changes in herself, a lightness she had not felt in years, a sense of being truly seen and heard that had been missing from her life for far too long. She also began to notice changes in the way the palace staff treated her. What had once been curious, cautious glances slowly transformed into something closer to respect, though whispers still followed her through the corridors whenever she visited. She overheard fragments of conversation among servants and guards, speculation about her growing closeness to the king, questions about what such an unusual friendship could possibly mean for the future. Elena tried not to let herself hope for anything beyond what these visits already offered her. She reminded herself constantly that kings did not fall in love with waitresses, that whatever connection had formed between them was likely nothing more than a passing curiosity that would eventually fade once Alaric grew bored of their conversations. But despite her efforts to guard her heart, she found herself looking forward to each invitation with an eagerness she could not fully suppress. One evening, several weeks into their unusual arrangement, Alaric asked her a question that caught her completely off guard. "Do you regret that night at the gathering?" he asked, his eyes studying her carefully across the small distance between their chairs. "Truly, now that you know who I am." Elena considered the question seriously before answering. "I regret causing you embarrassment, but I do not regret the honesty of that moment, even if it was misplaced. If I had known who you were, I would have hidden that part of myself, the same way I hide it from everyone else. Perhaps we would never have spoken again after that night." "Do you believe that honesty is worth the risk it carries?" he asked. "I believe it is the only thing worth anything at all," Elena replied quietly. "Everything else is just performance." Alaric fell silent for a long moment, studying her with an expression she had come to recognize over their weeks of conversation, a look that seemed to carry both admiration and something deeper, something she did not yet dare to name. "You are unlike anyone I have ever known, Elena Whitfield," he finally said. "I find myself thinking of our conversations even when we are apart, wondering what you might say about matters that trouble me, wondering how you would react to decisions I must make as king." Elena's heart pounded painfully against her ribs. "Why does that matter to you?" "I am not entirely certain yet," Alaric admitted, his voice quieter than usual. "But I intend to find out." Elena left the palace that night with her mind spinning, unable to shake the weight of his words, or the strange warmth that had settled permanently into her chest since their conversations began. She did not know what kind of future could possibly exist between a king and a waitress, did not know whether the growing connection between them was something real or simply an elaborate fantasy she had allowed herself to believe. But as the weeks continued to pass, and the invitations continued to arrive, Elena began to suspect that whatever was happening between them was far from finished, and that the story that had begun with a spilled glass of wine and a demand for someone to kneel was only just beginning to unfold into something neither of them could have predicted. News travels quickly within palace walls, faster than any messenger could carry it by hand, and it was not long before whispers of Elena's frequent visits reached the ears of those who held real power within the royal court. Advisors who had spent decades shaping the king's decisions began to notice the pattern of carriages arriving late in the evening, the same modest young woman escorted quietly through side corridors toward the private chamber overlooking the gardens. Lord Bennet, the eldest and most influential of the king's council, was among the first to raise concerns. He had served the royal family for over 30 years, first advising Alaric's father, and now guiding the young king through matters of state with a steady, sometimes overly cautious hand. He did not trust sudden changes, and nothing about Elena's presence in the palace felt anything less than sudden to him. "Your Majesty," he said one afternoon, standing before Alaric in the formal council chamber, his tone carefully measured despite the urgency behind his words. "The staff have noticed the frequency of your meetings with the young woman from the gathering. Questions are beginning to spread beyond these walls." Alaric did not look up immediately from the documents spread across his desk. "Questions are always spreading, Lord Bennet. It is the nature of a royal court." "This is different," Bennet pressed, stepping closer. "She is not a noble, not a foreign dignitary, not even a citizen of notable standing. She is a waitress, Your Majesty. Forgive my bluntness, but continued association with someone of her position could raise concerns among the other kingdoms we are currently negotiating with." Alaric finally looked up, his expression calm, but unmistakably firm. "I am aware of her position, Lord Bennet. I have not forgotten it, nor do I require reminding." "Then surely you understand the risk," Bennet continued, undeterred. "The merger negotiations with the Eastern Kingdom depend heavily on perceptions of stability and tradition. A king whose personal attentions are directed toward someone entirely outside noble circles could be seen as unpredictable, even reckless, by those observing from abroad." Alaric set down his pen slowly, folding his hands together as he studied his advisor with the same patient calm he seemed to carry into every difficult conversation. "Lord Bennet, I have spent my entire life making decisions calculated for the benefit of this kingdom, weighing every action against political consequence, foreign perception, and inherited expectation. Tell me, in all those years of careful calculation, when have I ever asked for your opinion on matters of my personal time?" Bennet hesitated, clearly recognizing the shift in tone. "Your Majesty, I only wish to protect the stability of this kingdom. And I appreciate your concern, Alaric replied evenly. But my private conversations with Elena Whitfield are exactly that, private, and they will remain so until I decide otherwise. The conversation ended there. Though Elena, unaware of the growing tension building around her presence in the palace, continued to visit whenever invitations arrived, her friendship with the king deepening with each passing week. She noticed occasional cold glances from certain members of the court, formal servants, who seemed reluctant to meet her eyes, but she assumed such reactions were simply the natural result of an outsider entering a world built entirely on strict tradition and hierarchy. It was during one of their evening conversations that Alaric finally mentioned the growing concern among his advisors, though he framed it carefully, unwilling to burden her with the full weight of political tension surrounding their friendship. There are those within my court who believe our conversations should end, he admitted, watching her reaction carefully. Elena felt her stomach tighten, though she tried to keep her expression neutral. Do you agree with them? No, he said simply, without hesitation. But I wanted you to know the truth of the situation, rather than allow you to remain unaware of the tension your presence has created. I never intended to create tension, Elena said quietly. Perhaps it would be easier if I simply stopped coming. Would that be easier for you? Alaric asked, his voice softer now, carrying a vulnerability she had rarely heard from him before. Elena hesitated, torn between honesty and self-protection. She thought about the emptiness that had defined her life before these conversations began, the loneliness that had settled so deeply into her apartment, and her days that she had almost forgotten what it felt like to be truly heard by another person. She thought about how much lighter she felt after each visit, how much she had come to treasure the quiet hours spent in that warm chamber overlooking the gardens. No, she finally admitted, it would not be easier at all. Something shifted in Alaric's expression at her words, a softening that Elena had never seen from him before, not even during their most vulnerable conversations. Then we will continue, regardless of what my advisors believe is wise. Their friendship deepened further in the weeks that followed, though the political tension surrounding their relationship continued to grow beneath the surface. Elena began to notice more direct signs of disapproval, whispered comments from palace staff, cold formality from nobles who occasionally crossed her path during her visits. She tried not to let it affect her, reminding herself constantly that her connection with Alaric was simply friendship, nothing more, regardless of what feelings had begun to stir quietly in her chest whenever she thought of him. One evening, as autumn settled over the palace gardens outside their usual meeting chamber, Alaric asked her to accompany him on a walk through the grounds, instead of remaining seated in their familiar chairs. Elena agreed, curious about this change in their routine, and followed him out into the cool evening air. The gardens stretched far beyond what she had imagined from the window of their meeting room, filled with carefully trimmed hedges, fountains that caught the last light of the setting sun, and pathways lined with flowers that seemed to glow softly in the fading daylight. They walked slowly, side by side, their conversation drifting comfortably between lighter topics and moments of quiet reflection. I used to walk these gardens with my mother, Alaric said quietly, pausing beside a large fountain at the center of the pathway. Before she passed, it is one of the few memories of her that remains clear in my mind. Elena watched him carefully, recognizing the rare vulnerability in his voice. You must miss her deeply. I do, he admitted. Though I have learned to carry that loss quietly, the way I have been taught to carry most difficult emotions since childhood. He turned to look at her then, his eyes carrying an intensity she had not seen from him before. You are the first person in a long time who has made me feel comfortable enough to speak of her at all. Elena's breath caught in her chest, the warmth of his words settling deep inside her despite her efforts to remain guarded. I am honored that you trust me with something so personal. Trust has never come easily to me, Alaric said, stepping closer, though he maintained a respectful distance between them. But with you, it has never felt like a struggle at all. They stood together beside the fountain for a long moment, the silence between them comfortable rather than tense, filled with an understanding that neither of them fully dared to name yet. Elena felt something shift within her chest, a recognition that whatever was happening between them had already grown far beyond simple friendship, regardless of how carefully she had tried to guard against such feelings. As they finally continued their walk back toward the palace, Elena could not shake the growing certainty that her life had already changed irreversibly since the night she had demanded a stranger kneel before her without knowing his crown. She did not know what the future held for two people from such impossibly different worlds, did not know whether the growing tension among the king's advisors would eventually force an end to their unlikely friendship. But as she glanced sideways at Alaric walking silently beside her, his expression thoughtful and calm beneath the darkening sky, Elena allowed herself, just for a moment, to hope that whatever was growing between them might somehow survive the obstacles already gathering against it. Winter arrived early that year, wrapping the palace grounds in a thin layer of frost that glittered beneath the pale morning light. Elena had grown so accustomed to her visits by now that the palace no longer felt as intimidating as it once had, though she still marveled at the sheer size and beauty of it every time she passed through those enormous wooden doors. What had once felt like an impossible dream had slowly settled into something closer to routine, though the warmth she felt in Alaric's presence never once faded into familiarity. Their conversations had grown even more open in recent weeks, touching on subjects Elena never imagined she would discuss with a king. He asked her opinion on matters of trade policy, on the treatment of workers within the kingdom, on the fairness of laws that had existed for generations without question. At first, Elena hesitated to offer her thoughts, unsure whether her perspective held any value in matters so far beyond her understanding. But Alaric pressed her gently each time, insisting that her viewpoint, as someone who had lived outside the palace walls, who understood struggle in ways his advisors never could, carried a weight that formal education alone could never provide. "You see things differently than everyone else who surrounds me," he told her one evening as they sat near the fire in their familiar chamber. "My advisors speak of policy in terms of numbers and reports. You speak of the people those numbers actually represent." "I only speak from experience," Elena replied, though she could not deny the pride that warmed her chest at his words. "I do not have the education your advisors carry. Perhaps that is precisely why your perspective matters," Alaric said. "Education teaches theory. You understand reality." Their bond continued to deepen through these exchanges, though Elena remained careful never to overstep the boundaries she had drawn for herself, terrified of allowing her growing feelings to become obvious, terrified of ruining the fragile friendship that had somehow bloomed between two people who should never have crossed paths at all. Yet despite her caution, she could not deny the way her heart quickened whenever Alaric entered a room, the way she found herself thinking of him constantly during the long hours between their visits. It was during a particularly cold evening, as snow began to fall gently outside the tall windows of their meeting chamber, that Alaric finally addressed the growing tension that had settled between them, unspoken but undeniable. "Elena," he said, setting aside the book he had been reading aloud to her only moments before, "I must ask you something, and I need you to answer honestly, as you always have." Elena's heart pounded as she met his gaze, sensing the shift in the atmosphere between them. "Of course. Do you feel what I feel?" he asked, his voice quieter than she had ever heard it, stripped of the composed authority he carried so effortlessly in every other setting. "When we are together, do you feel something beyond simple friendship?" Elena's breath caught in her throat. She had spent weeks avoiding this exact conversation, terrified of what honesty might reveal, terrified of the impossible distance between their worlds that no amount of feeling could ever truly bridge. But as she looked into his eyes, patient and vulnerable in a way she had never witnessed from him before, she knew she could not lie to him now, not after everything they had already shared. "Yes," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper, "I feel it too." Relief washed visibly across Alaric's face, followed quickly by something warmer, something that made Elena's heart ache with a mixture of joy and fear. "I have tried to deny it," he admitted. "I told myself it was simply curiosity, simply the novelty of speaking with someone so unlike anyone else in my life. But it has grown into something I can no longer pretend does not exist. This cannot end well," Elena said quietly, though her heart ached with the words even as she spoke them. "You are a king. I am a waitress. Your advisors already disapprove of our friendship. What would they say about something more? I do not require their approval for matters of the heart," Alaric said firmly, though Elena could see the weight of political reality pressing behind his words despite his conviction. But I understand your fear, Elena. I share it, though I have spent my entire life being trained to hide such uncertainty. They sat in silence for a long moment, the fire crackling softly beside them, snow continuing to fall outside the tall windows. Elena felt the weight of everything unspoken between them, the impossible complications that awaited any future they might attempt to build together, yet none of it diminished the warmth spreading through her chest at his confession. "What happens now?" she finally asked. Alaric reached across the small distance between their chairs, taking her hand gently in his own, the first time he had touched her so intentionally since their friendship began. "Now, I intend to court you properly, Elena Whitfield, regardless of what obstacles stand in our path." Elena's heart soared and ached simultaneously, joy tangled together with fear of everything that would surely follow such a declaration. "Your advisors will never accept this." "They do not need to accept it," Alaric said, his voice carrying the same quiet firmness she had witnessed during his conversation with Lord Bennet weeks before. "They need only accept that I have made my decision." News of their growing relationship could not remain hidden for long, despite Alaric's efforts to protect Elena from the harshest scrutiny of palace politics. Within days, whispers had transformed into open discussion among the nobility, rumors spreading through formal gatherings and private conversations alike, each version growing more exaggerated than the last. Some claimed Elena had somehow bewitched the king through unknown means. Others insisted she was nothing more than a passing distraction that would fade once the novelty wore off. Very few believed, or were willing to admit, that genuine feeling could exist between a king and someone so far removed from noble circles. Lord Bennet requested another private audience with Alaric, almost immediately after the rumors began circulating formally through the court. This time, his tone carried none of the careful diplomacy he had shown during their previous conversation. "Your Majesty, this has gone far beyond acceptable boundaries," he said, his voice tight with barely controlled frustration. "The Eastern Kingdom's ambassadors have already begun asking questions about the stability of our negotiations. They fear an unpredictable ruler, one whose personal decisions might extend into matters of state without proper counsel." "My personal decisions have not affected our negotiations," Alaric replied evenly, though his patience was clearly beginning to wear thin. "Not yet," Bennet pressed. "But how long until they do? How long until this woman's influence begins shaping decisions that should belong solely to trained advisors and traditional counsel?" "Elena has never once attempted to influence matters of state," Alaric said firmly. "Her perspective has enriched my understanding of this kingdom's people, nothing more." Bennet's expression hardened. "Your Majesty, I have served this crown faithfully for 30 years. I ask you now, as someone who has always had your best interest at heart, to consider the weight of what you are risking for the sake of personal feeling." Alaric studied his advisor for a long moment before responding, his voice carrying an authority that left no room for further argument. "I have considered it carefully, Lord Bennet, and I have made my decision. Elena Whitfield will remain a part of my life, regardless of the political discomfort it may cause among those who value tradition over genuine connection." Word of this exchange spread quickly through the palace, reaching Elena's ears through the careful whispers of the few servants who had grown fond of her during her frequent visits. She felt the weight of the growing controversy pressing heavily against her chest, torn between gratitude for Alaric's unwavering support and guilt over the political turmoil her presence had created within his court. That evening, as she sat once again in their familiar chamber, she voiced her concerns openly for the first time. "Perhaps I should step away," she said quietly, unable to meet his eyes. "Perhaps this would all become easier if I simply disappeared from your life before the damage grows worse." Alaric's expression shifted immediately, something fierce and protective flashing behind his usually calm eyes. "Do not speak of disappearing, Elena. Not now, not ever. I have spent my entire life following the expectations placed upon me by tradition and duty. For the first time, I have found something worth fighting for, beyond those expectations, and I will not allow fear or political pressure to take that away from me." Elena's eyes filled with tears at the intensity of his words, overwhelmed by the depth of feeling behind them. "I am afraid," she admitted quietly, "afraid of failing you. afraid of never being enough for the life you were born into. Alaric moved closer, taking both her hands in his own, his eyes steady and unwavering as he looked into hers. You have already proven yourself more honest, more genuine, more worthy of respect than anyone I have ever known within these palace walls. Whatever challenges lie ahead, we will face them together, Elena. I promise you that. Despite the growing storm of political tension surrounding them, Elena felt a fragile hope settling into her chest as she looked into his eyes that evening, a hope that perhaps, against every impossible odds stacked before them, their story might somehow find a way to survive. The weeks that followed Alaric's declaration brought changes neither of them had fully anticipated, some welcome, and others far more difficult to endure. Elena found herself no longer arriving at the palace through quiet side entrances under cover of darkness, but instead through the main courtyard in daylight, her visits acknowledged openly by palace staff who no longer needed to whisper about her presence behind carefully guarded expressions. Yet with this new openness came a different kind of scrutiny, one Elena had not fully prepared herself to face. Nobles who passed her in the corridors offered polite but cold greetings, their eyes assessing her plain clothing and modest bearing with barely concealed judgment. She overheard fragments of conversation not meant for her ears, comments about her lack of proper education, her common upbringing, her complete absence of any noble bloodline that might justify her growing closeness to the crown. Elena tried her best to ignore these whispers, reminding herself constantly of Alaric's unwavering support, but the weight of constant judgment slowly began to wear on her confidence in ways she had not expected. She found herself second-guessing simple decisions, worrying over what to wear, how to speak, how to carry herself in a world built entirely on rules and traditions she had never been taught to understand. One afternoon, while waiting in a small antechamber for Alaric to finish a lengthy meeting with his council, Elena overheard a conversation between two noblewomen that struck deeper than any whispered comment she had encountered before. "She will never last," one woman said quietly to her companion, unaware that Elena sat just beyond the partially open door. "The king is simply distracted by novelty. Once the excitement fades, he will return to considering proper matches, women who understand the responsibilities of ruling a kingdom." "Do you truly believe he cares for her deeply?" the second woman asked. "Perhaps for now," the first replied, "but affection built on rebellion against tradition rarely survives the weight of reality. Mark my words, within a year, this entire situation will be nothing more than a forgotten scandal." Elena sat frozen in her chair, the words settling into her chest like heavy stones. She had known, of course, that such doubts existed throughout the court, but hearing them spoken so plainly, so confidently, shattered the fragile confidence she had been building over the past several weeks. She left the antechamber before Alaric's meeting had even concluded, unable to face him with the weight of those overheard words pressing so heavily against her heart. That evening, when Alaric arrived at their usual meeting chamber and found her unusually quiet, he immediately sensed something had changed. "Elena, what troubles you?" he asked gently, settling into the chair across from her. She hesitated before answering, unsure whether sharing the overheard conversation would only add unnecessary burden to everything he already carried as king. But she had promised herself, and him, complete honesty from the very beginning of their relationship, and she could not bring herself to break that promise now. "I overheard some of the noblewomen speaking today," she admitted quietly. "They believe our relationship is simply a passing distraction, that you will eventually return to considering proper matches once the novelty fades." Alaric's expression tightened with visible frustration, though Elena could see he was working hard to keep his composure. "Elena, look at me." She lifted her eyes reluctantly, meeting his steady gaze. "I have spent my entire life surrounded by people who speak with confidence about matters they know nothing about," he said firmly. "Noblewomen who gossip in palace corridors do not determine the truth of my feelings, nor do they hold any authority over the decisions I make regarding my own heart." "But what if they are right?" Elena asked, her voice trembling slightly despite her efforts to remain composed. "What if this is simply novelty for you, something that feels exciting now, but will eventually fade once you realize how impossible our situation truly is?" Alaric rose from his chair and knelt before her, an echo of the very position she had once forced upon him during their first fateful encounter, though this time the gesture carried none of the humiliation from that original moment, only tenderness and conviction. "I have knelt before you once already, Elena, though you did not know then who I truly was," he said softly, taking her hands gently in his own. "I kneel before you again now, fully aware of everything that separates our worlds, and I tell you with complete certainty that what I feel for you is not novelty. It is not fleeting curiosity, nor rebellion against tradition simply for its own sake. It is genuine, deep, and unwavering affection, the kind I have never once experienced with anyone else in my entire life." Tears filled Elena's eyes as she listened to his words, overwhelmed by the sincerity behind them. "I am terrified of losing this," she whispered, "of losing you, of failing to become someone worthy of standing beside a king." "You do not need to become anyone other than exactly who you already are," Alaric said firmly. "It is precisely who you are, Elena Whitfield, honest and unguarded and genuine in a world filled with calculation, that has captured my heart so completely." Their relationship continued to strengthen in the weeks that followed, despite the ongoing whispers and judgment that surrounded them within palace walls. Alaric began including Elena more openly in small gatherings and events, introducing her gradually to members of the court who had previously only known her through rumor and speculation. Some remained coldly distant, unwilling to accept her presence regardless of the king's clear affection. Others, slowly and cautiously, began to warm toward her, impressed despite themselves by her genuine kindness and quiet strength in the face of constant scrutiny. Gareth, Elena's former manager, reached out to her during this period as well, curious and somewhat nervous about the dramatic turn her life had taken since that fateful evening at his event hall. When they finally met for a quiet conversation over coffee, away from palace walls and prying eyes, Elena found herself grateful for the familiar presence of someone who had known her before everything changed so completely. "I still cannot believe it," Gareth admitted, shaking his head as he stirred sugar into his cup. "The waitress who mocked a king, now courted by that very same king. It sounds like something from a story, not real life." Elena laughed softly, though the sound carried a hint of exhaustion beneath it. "Some days it feels that way to me as well. I never imagined my life taking this path." "Are you happy?" Gareth asked, his expression turning more serious. Elena considered the question carefully before answering. "I am happy with him," she said honestly, "but the world surrounding him is far more complicated than I ever imagined. Every day feels like a battle against judgment I never asked to face." "But you continue fighting that battle," Gareth observed, "which tells me everything I need to know about how deeply you must care for him." Elena smiled softly, grateful for his understanding. "I do care for him, Gareth, more than I ever thought possible." As winter slowly began to fade into the first signs of spring, whispers of a formal announcement began circulating throughout the palace. Speculation about whether King Alaric intended to make his relationship with Elena something more permanent, something that could no longer be dismissed as passing rebellion against tradition. Elena tried not to let herself hope too strongly, aware of how quickly such speculation could crumble beneath the weight of political reality. But as she spent more time within the palace walls, growing more comfortable with each passing week, despite the ongoing challenges surrounding her, Elena began to allow herself something she had not dared to feel in a very long time. She began to allow herself genuine hope for a future she had never imagined possible, a future standing beside a king who had chosen her honesty over every calculated advantage tradition might have offered him instead. Whatever challenges still awaited them, Elena felt increasingly certain that she and Alaric were building something strong enough to withstand even the harshest judgment the world might throw against them. Spring arrived at the palace with a gentleness that seemed to mirror the slow, steady growth of trust between Elena and Alaric, though the political storm surrounding their relationship showed no signs of fully settling. Lord Bennet continued pressing his concerns during council meetings, joined now by several other advisors, who worried openly about the impact Elena's presence might have on delicate negotiations with neighboring kingdoms. Elena had grown more familiar with palace life by this point, though she never fully lost the sense of being an outsider within its formal walls. She spent more time now not only with Alaric but also observing the daily workings of the court, watching how decisions were made, how power moved quietly between advisors and nobles, who had spent their entire lives learning the unspoken rules of influence and diplomacy. It was during one such observation, sitting quietly at the edge of a formal council meeting Alaric had invited her to witness, that Elena first understood the true scale of what stood between them. The Eastern Kingdom's ambassador, a stern man named Corwin, spoke at length about trade agreements and territorial boundaries, his words carefully measured, his eyes occasionally flickering toward Elena with obvious distaste. After the meeting concluded, Corwin approached Alaric directly, his voice carrying just enough volume for Elena to hear, despite his attempt at discretion. "Your Majesty," he said stiffly, "the Eastern Council has expressed concern regarding rumors of your personal involvement with someone outside noble circles. They worry this may reflect instability that could complicate our proposed alliance." Alaric's expression remained calm, though Elena could see the tension building behind his eyes. "My personal life has no bearing on the terms of our proposed alliance, Ambassador Corwin." "Perhaps not directly," Corwin replied carefully, "but perception matters greatly in matters of state. A king whose judgment appears swayed by personal feeling rather than tradition and counsel may raise doubts about his reliability as a partner in more complex negotiations." Elena felt her stomach twist painfully as she listened, the weight of Corwin's words settling heavily against the fragile hope she had been nurturing over the past several months. She had known, of course, that their relationship carried political complications, but hearing it discussed so openly, so directly connected to the stability of an entire alliance, made the reality of their situation feel far more dangerous than it ever had before. That evening, Alaric found her sitting quietly near the fountain in the palace gardens, the same fountain where he had first spoken to her of his mother months before. He sat beside her without speaking at first, sensing the weight pressing against her thoughts. "You heard Corwin's words today," he finally said. Elena nodded slowly. "I did." "Elena, I need you to understand something," Alaric said, turning to face her fully. "The pressures of ruling a kingdom will never fully disappear, regardless of who stands beside me. There will always be ambassadors with concerns, advisors with reservations, nobles who prefer tradition over genuine feeling. If I allow their voices to dictate my heart, I will spend the rest of my life ruled by fear rather than conviction." "But what if your conviction costs you the alliance?" Elena asked, her voice trembling with genuine worry. "What if my presence here truly does jeopardize something as important as peace between kingdoms?" Alaric took her hands gently in his own, his eyes steady and unwavering. "I have negotiated with Ambassador Corwin for over a year, Elena. His concerns regarding my personal life are merely a convenient excuse to extract more favorable terms from our agreement. Kingdoms have survived far greater controversies than a king choosing to love someone outside noble circles." Elena studied his expression carefully, searching for any hint of doubt behind his confident words, but found only steady conviction staring back at her. "You truly believe that?" "I do," Alaric confirmed. "And even if I am wrong, even if our relationship does complicate certain negotiations, I would rather face those complications honestly than sacrifice genuine happiness for the sake of political convenience." Despite his reassurance, Elena could not fully shake the anxiety that had settled into her chest since witnessing that council meeting. She began to notice more carefully the political weight resting on Alaric's shoulders, the endless demands of ruling a kingdom that stretched far beyond the quiet, comfortable conversations they shared within their private chamber. She began to understand, more fully than ever before, the true magnitude of what she was asking him to risk by choosing her. Determined to prove herself worthy of the position she now found herself occupying, Elena began quietly educating herself about matters of state, spending hours in the palace library studying history, trade policy, and diplomatic tradition. She wanted to understand the world Alaric moved through every single day, wanted to offer more than simple emotional support during their conversations, wanted to prove, both to herself and to the doubtful nobles surrounding them, that she belonged in this world regardless of her humble beginnings. Alaric noticed her efforts almost immediately, watching with quiet admiration as Elena's understanding of palace politics deepened week after week. During their evening conversations, she began offering more informed perspectives on matters he shared with her, blending her natural understanding of ordinary people's struggles with a growing knowledge of formal policy and diplomatic nuance. You continue to surprise me, Alaric told her one evening, genuine admiration evident in his voice. Most people born into this world spend years learning what you have taught yourself within mere months. I refuse to be seen as simply a passing distraction, Elena said firmly. If I am to stand beside you, I want to understand the weight of what that truly means. Their growing partnership did not go unnoticed among the palace staff and remaining skeptical nobles. Slowly, cautiously, attitudes toward Elena began shifting throughout the court. Servants who had once whispered nervously behind her back began greeting her with genuine warmth. Nobles who had dismissed her as an unworthy distraction found themselves reluctantly impressed by her growing knowledge and unwavering dedication to understanding the kingdom she hoped to one day help serve. Even Lord Bennet, despite his continued reservations, could not deny the transformation he witnessed in Elena over those months. During one particularly tense council meeting regarding tax policy affecting the kingdom's poorest citizens, Elena offered a perspective so grounded in genuine understanding of struggle and hardship that several advisors, Bennet included, found themselves nodding in reluctant agreement. After the meeting concluded, Bennet approached her privately, his expression carrying none of the coldness she had grown accustomed to from their previous interactions. "Miss Whitfield," he said formally, "your perspective today offered insight this council has sorely lacked for quite some time." Elena, surprised by his unexpected acknowledgement, offered a grateful smile. "Thank you, Lord Bennet. I only spoke from experience." "Perhaps that experience holds more value than I initially believed," Bennet admitted, though clearly still uncomfortable fully surrendering his reservations. "I remain cautious regarding the political complications your presence creates, but I can no longer deny the genuine care you hold for this kingdom's well-being." It was a small victory, but one that filled Elena with quiet pride, as she reflected on how far she had come since that terrified morning she had first received the royal summons months before. She was no longer simply the waitress who had humiliated a king through ignorance and frustration. She was slowly, carefully, becoming someone capable of standing confidently within his world, earning respect not through inherited privilege, but through genuine dedication and unwavering honesty. As spring deepened into early summer, Elena sensed a shift building within Alaric as well, a quiet determination settling behind his usually composed expression whenever their conversations drifted toward the future. She did not yet know what that determination might mean, but she felt certain that whatever decision he was preparing to make would carry consequences far greater than anything they had faced together so far. The summer heat settled heavily over the palace grounds, though nothing compared to the tension building within its formal halls, as rumors began circulating that King Alaric intended to make some kind of significant announcement regarding his relationship with Elena. Servants whispered about extra security measures being arranged, nobles speculated nervously among themselves during formal gatherings, and even the Eastern Kingdom's ambassador began sending increasingly pointed inquiries about the king's intentions. Elena felt the shift in atmosphere the moment she arrived at the palace one particular afternoon, summoned earlier than usual through a formal invitation that carried a different tone than their typical private meetings. Instead of being led toward their familiar chamber overlooking the gardens, she found herself guided instead toward a smaller meeting room near the formal council chambers, where Alaric waited alone, his expression more serious than she had seen in weeks. "Elena," he said as she entered, rising immediately to greet her. "Thank you for coming so quickly." "Your letter sounded urgent," Elena replied, studying his expression carefully, searching for any sign of what might have prompted this unusual summons. "Has something happened?" Alaric guided her toward a chair, though he remained standing himself, pacing slightly as he gathered his thoughts. "I have made a decision, Elena, one that I believe will finally settle the uncertainty surrounding our relationship, though I fear it will also intensify the political storm we have already been navigating." Elena's heart pounded as she waited for him to continue, uncertain whether to feel hope or fear at his words. "I intend to announce our courtship formally before the entire court," Alaric said finally, his voice steady despite the weight of what he was proposing. "No more private conversations hidden behind closed doors. No more whispered rumors circulating without confirmation. I want the kingdom, and every foreign ambassador watching from abroad, to understand clearly that my intentions toward you are genuine and permanent." Elena's breath caught in her throat. Alaric, are you certain? Once this becomes public, there will be no taking it back. The scrutiny will only intensify. I am aware of the risks, Alaric said, kneeling before her chair, taking her hands gently in his own. But I have spent months watching you prove yourself worthy of this world, through genuine dedication and unwavering honesty. I refuse to continue hiding what I feel for you, simply to appease those who cannot look beyond tradition. Tears filled Elena's eyes as she absorbed the magnitude of what he was proposing. The Eastern Alliance negotiations, your advisors, everything we have already struggled against. This will only make it more difficult. Perhaps, Alaric acknowledged. But avoiding difficulty has never once been a measure of what is right, Elena. I would rather face every obstacle standing before us honestly than continue living a life divided between private happiness and public denial. The formal announcement was scheduled for the following week, timed deliberately to coincide with a grand gathering already planned to celebrate the kingdom's founding anniversary, an event that would draw nobles, foreign dignitaries, and citizens from across the realm. Elena spent the days leading up to the announcement in a constant state of nervous anticipation, torn between excitement at finally having their relationship acknowledged openly and terror at the magnitude of scrutiny that awaited her. Gareth, upon hearing the news during one of their occasional meetings, could hardly contain his shock. A formal announcement, he repeated, shaking his head in disbelief. Elena, this changes everything. Once this happens, there is no returning to ordinary life. I know, Elena admitted, her hands trembling slightly around her coffee cup. But I have come too far to turn back now. I love him, Gareth. Despite everything standing between us, I love him deeply. Then I am happy for you, Gareth said sincerely, though concern remained evident in his expression. Just be prepared for whatever comes next. Not everyone will accept this as easily as I have. Elena knew he was right. In the days leading up to the anniversary celebration, whispers throughout the palace grew louder, more pointed, some carrying genuine curiosity, while others carried undisguised hostility. Certain nobles began openly questioning whether such an announcement might damage the kingdom's international standing, while others quietly expressed cautious admiration for a king willing to defy centuries of tradition for the sake of genuine feeling. Lord Bennet, despite his gradual warming toward Elena over recent months, expressed serious reservations when Alaric informed his council of the planned announcement. Your Majesty, Bennet said, during their final meeting before the anniversary celebration, I understand your feelings toward Miss Whitfield have proven genuine, and I have come to respect her dedication to understanding this kingdom's needs. But a formal announcement carries permanent consequences. Once made, it cannot be quietly withdrawn without significant damage to the crown's reputation. I am aware of the permanence involved, Lord Bennet, Alaric replied firmly. That permanence is precisely the point. I do not intend to withdraw this announcement, regardless of whatever consequences may follow. Bennet studied his king for a long moment, before finally nodding, a gesture of reluctant acceptance rather than full agreement. Then I will support your decision, Your Majesty, though I remain uncertain how the Eastern Kingdom will receive such news. As the day of the grand celebration finally arrived, Elena found herself standing before a mirror in a private chamber prepared specifically for her within the palace, staring at her reflection with a mixture of disbelief and overwhelming nervousness. The dress prepared for her that evening bore no resemblance to the simple navy blue garment she had worn during her very first visit to the throne room months before. Deep emerald fabric flowed elegantly around her, embroidered with delicate silver thread that caught the light with every slight movement, a gift Alaric had commissioned specifically for this occasion. A servant helped arrange her hair carefully, weaving small silver ornaments through dark strands that framed her face with unexpected elegance. Elena barely recognized the woman staring back at her from the mirror, though she reminded herself firmly that regardless of the elaborate dress and careful preparation, she remained fundamentally the same person who had once demanded a stranger kneel before her without knowing his crown. As evening approached and the grand hall began filling with nobles, dignitaries, and citizens gathered to celebrate the kingdom's founding anniversary, Elena waited nervously in a private antechamber, her heart pounding so violently she feared it might be audible to anyone standing nearby. She could hear the distant sound of music and conversation drifting from the main hall, The formal announcement she knew awaited her arrival growing closer with each passing minute. A soft knock came at her door, and Alaric entered, dressed in formal royal attire that seemed to carry even more weight and authority than usual, given the significance of the evening ahead. His eyes softened immediately upon seeing her, warmth and admiration replacing the nervous tension he had carried throughout the preparations. "You look beautiful, Elena," he said softly, crossing the room to stand before her. "I am terrified," Elena admitted honestly, her hands trembling despite her efforts to remain composed. Alaric took her hands gently in his own, steadying their trembling with the warmth of his touch. "Whatever happens tonight, whatever reactions await us in that hall, know that I stand beside you completely, Elena. Nothing that follows will change what I feel for you." Elena drew a steadying breath, drawing strength from his unwavering conviction. "Then let us face it together." Together, they walked toward the entrance of the grand hall, the sound of music and conversation growing louder with each step, the weight of the announcement awaiting them settling heavily against Elena's chest, even as Alaric's steady presence beside her offered the courage she desperately needed to continue forward into whatever awaited them beyond those enormous doors. The grand hall glowed with golden light as hundreds of candles flickered along the walls, their warm glow reflecting off crystal chandeliers hanging high above the gathered crowd. Elena had never seen so many people assembled in one place. Nobles dressed in elaborate finery, foreign dignitaries speaking in hushed tones among themselves, ordinary citizens who had been invited to celebrate the kingdom's founding anniversary, standing near the edges of the enormous room, their eyes wide with wonder at the grandeur surrounding them. As Alaric led Elena through a side entrance toward the raised platform where he would soon address the assembled crowd, she felt every eye in the room shift toward her, curiosity and speculation evident in the sudden hush that fell over nearby conversations. She kept her chin lifted, drawing strength from the steady presence of Alaric's hand, resting gently against the small of her back, though her heart continued pounding with a mixture of fear and determination. Ambassador Corwin stood near the front of the gathered crowd, his expression carefully neutral though Elena could sense the calculation behind his watchful eyes. Lord Bennet stood nearby as well, his posture rigid with tension despite his earlier acceptance of Alaric's decision. Elena searched the crowd briefly for any familiar friendly face, finding brief comfort in spotting Gareth standing near the back of the hall, having been invited specifically for this occasion, his expression carrying quiet encouragement even from such a distance. Alaric mounted the raised platform first, his presence immediately commanding the attention of the entire hall, as the last murmurs of conversation faded into expectant silence. Elena remained just below the platform, uncertain whether she was meant to join him or wait until he called for her, her nervousness intensifying with each passing second of silence. "Honored guests," Alaric began, his voice carrying easily across the vast hall with practiced authority. "Tonight we gather to celebrate the founding of this kingdom, a legacy built upon centuries of tradition, sacrifice, and unwavering dedication to the people we serve." The crowd listened attentively as he spoke, his words weaving together historical reflection with genuine gratitude for the kingdom's continued prosperity. Elena listened as well, though her attention remained divided between his formal address and the growing anticipation of what she knew awaited at the conclusion of his speech. Finally, Alaric paused, his expression shifting slightly as he prepared to address the true purpose behind tonight's gathering, beyond simple celebration of tradition. "Tonight, I also wish to share something deeply personal with all of you," he continued, his eyes finding Elena's briefly, before returning to address the crowd. "Over these past months, I have come to know a woman whose honesty, strength, and genuine dedication to this kingdom's people have profoundly changed my understanding of what true leadership requires." Murmurs began rippling through the crowd, nobles exchanging knowing glances as they realized the direction of his address. Elena felt her heart pounding so violently she feared it might be visible through her elegant dress. "Many of you have heard whispers, rumors, speculation regarding my relationship with Elena Whitfield," Alaric continued, his voice steady despite the weight of what he was about to declare. "Tonight, I wish to end that speculation with complete honesty." He extended his hand toward Elena, gesturing for her to join him upon the platform. With trembling legs, she climbed the few steps separating them, standing beside him, as hundreds of eyes watched her every movement with unrelenting scrutiny. Elena Whitfield has taught me more about genuine courage and honesty than any advisor or tradition ever could, Alaric declared, taking her hand firmly in his own before the entire assembled court. She has faced judgment, scrutiny, and impossible expectation with unwavering grace, proving herself worthy not through inherited privilege, but through genuine dedication to understanding and serving this kingdom's true needs. Elena felt tears threatening at the corners of her eyes as she listened to his words, overwhelmed by the sincerity and conviction carried within each phrase. The crowd remained largely silent, though she could see varying reactions rippling across different faces, some carrying genuine warmth while others remained coldly skeptical. "It is with complete certainty and unwavering conviction," Alaric continued, his voice rising slightly to ensure every corner of the hall could hear his declaration, "that I announce my intention to court Elena Whitfield formally, with the eventual goal of making her my queen." The hall erupted into a mixture of gasps, murmured conversation, and scattered applause, the reaction far from unanimous, but undeniably significant, given the magnitude of what had just been declared. Elena searched the crowd nervously, finding Ambassador Corwin's expression carefully neutral, despite the obvious tension behind his eyes, while Lord Bennet, despite his earlier reservations, offered a small, respectful nod in her direction. Near the back of the hall, a group of nobles began whispering urgently among themselves, their expressions carrying clear disapproval, while closer to the platform, several citizens who had been invited to witness the celebration began applauding more enthusiastically, seemingly moved by the genuine emotion evident in the king's declaration. As the initial shock began settling into more structured reactions throughout the hall, one voice rose above the murmured conversation, carrying enough authority to draw immediate attention. Lady Prescott, an elderly noblewoman known throughout the court for her sharp tongue and unwavering dedication to tradition, stepped forward from the crowd. "Your Majesty," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the hall, "forgive my bluntness, but this announcement threatens centuries of tradition regarding proper succession and noble bloodlines. How can this kingdom expect stability when its future queen holds no formal training in matters of state, no noble heritage to guide her judgment?" A tense silence followed her challenge, the entire hall waiting to see how Alaric would respond to such a direct confrontation before the assembled court. Elena felt her chest tighten with anxiety, though she forced herself to remain composed, refusing to show weakness before such open scrutiny. Before Alaric could respond, however, Elena found herself stepping forward, her voice steadier than she expected, as she addressed Lady Prescott directly. "Lady Prescott," she said, her words carrying clearly across the hushed hall, "you are correct that I hold no noble heritage, no formal training passed down through generations of privilege, but I have spent my entire life understanding struggle, hardship, and the genuine needs of ordinary citizens who make up the majority of this kingdom's population." The hall remained silent, every eye focused intently on Elena, as she continued speaking with growing confidence. "Tradition has value," she acknowledged, "but tradition, without genuine understanding of the people it claims to serve, becomes empty ceremony rather than true leadership. I do not ask for your immediate acceptance, Lady Prescott, nor for the acceptance of anyone within this hall who doubts my worthiness. I ask only for the opportunity to prove, through genuine dedication and continued honesty, that worthiness comes not from bloodline, but from character." A long moment of silence followed her words, before scattered applause began rippling through the crowd, growing steadily louder as more guests joined in genuine appreciation for her courage and conviction. Lady Prescott's expression remained skeptical, though even she offered a reluctant nod of acknowledgement at the strength behind Elena's response. Alaric turned to Elena, unmistakable pride evident in his expression, as he took her hand once again before the entire assembled court. "This is precisely why I have chosen her," he declared to the hall. "Not despite her origins, but because of the genuine strength and honesty those origins have given her." As the formal celebration continued late into the evening, Elena found herself gradually approached by nobles who had previously remained coldly distant, some offering genuine congratulations, while others maintained careful diplomatic neutrality regarding the unprecedented announcement. She knew the road ahead remained far from settled, knew that political complications and continued skepticism would likely follow them for months, perhaps years, to come. But as she stood beside Alaric near the end of the celebration, watching the last guests slowly depart the grand hall, Elena felt a fragile but genuine hope settling into her chest, a certainty that whatever challenges still awaited them, she and Alaric had already proven themselves capable of facing them together, with honesty and unwavering conviction, guiding every step forward into their uncertain but deeply hopeful future. In the weeks following the formal announcement, Elena discovered that public acknowledgement of their relationship brought a different kind of pressure than the private uncertainty she had endured before. Where once she had worried about hidden judgment and whispered speculation, she now faced open scrutiny from every direction, her every action, word, and decision suddenly subject to public interpretation and criticism. Newspapers throughout the kingdom carried stories about the unprecedented courtship, some sympathetic to the genuine romance unfolding between king and commoner, others far more critical, questioning whether Elena possessed the necessary qualities to eventually serve as queen. She learned to read these publications with careful detachment, reminding herself constantly that public opinion, however loud, did not determine the genuine truth of her worth or her relationship with Alaric. Ambassador Corwin's concerns regarding the Eastern Alliance proved less catastrophic than Elena had originally feared, though negotiations did grow noticeably more complicated in the months following the announcement. Alaric spent countless hours in council meetings, working carefully to reassure foreign dignitaries that his personal happiness would not compromise the kingdom's diplomatic commitments. Elena, determined to support him however possible, continued deepening her own understanding of trade policy and diplomatic tradition, occasionally offering perspectives during less formal discussions that surprised even the most skeptical advisors with their practical wisdom. Lord Bennet, who had once stood among Elena's most vocal critics, gradually transformed into one of her most valuable allies within the palace walls. His decades of experience navigating court politics proved invaluable, as Elena learned to move more confidently through the complex social landscape surrounding her new position. He began quietly mentoring her, offering guidance on formal etiquette, diplomatic protocol, and the subtle art of navigating conversations with nobles who remained resistant to accepting her presence. "You have proven yourself more capable than many who were born into this world," Bennet told her one afternoon, as they walked together through the palace gardens, reviewing details of an upcoming diplomatic gathering she would soon attend. "I confess I doubted the wisdom of the king's decision when this began. I no longer harbor such doubts. Your guidance has made this transition far easier than it otherwise would have been," Elena replied sincerely. "I am grateful for your willingness to look beyond your initial reservations." "Wisdom requires the willingness to admit when one's assumptions prove incorrect," Bennet said simply. "You have proven mine incorrect many times over these past months." Despite these gradual victories, Elena continued facing significant challenges from certain corners of the court. Lady Prescott, though never openly hostile following their exchange during the formal announcement, maintained careful distance, her skepticism evident in every polite but cool interaction between them. Several other nobles followed her example, offering surface-level courtesy while clearly withholding genuine acceptance of Elena's growing role within royal circles. It was during this period of gradual but incomplete acceptance that Elena faced perhaps her most significant test yet, an incident that threatened to undo months of careful progress in a single devastating moment. A formal diplomatic gathering had been arranged to welcome delegates from a distant kingdom seeking to establish new trade relations. Elena, now regularly included in such formal events, attended alongside Alaric, dressed elegantly and prepared, she believed, for whatever challenges the evening might present. She had spent weeks studying the customs and expectations of the visiting delegation, determined to represent both herself and Alaric with dignity and competence. The evening proceeded smoothly at first, formal introductions and careful diplomatic conversation filling the elegant reception hall prepared for the occasion. Elena engaged confidently with several visiting delegates, her growing knowledge of diplomatic protocol evident in the respectful, informed conversations she maintained throughout the evening. However, midway through the gathering, A misunderstanding arose regarding a particular customary greeting expected from visiting delegates, a subtle but significant breach of protocol that Elena, despite her careful preparation, failed to recognize in time to correct gracefully. The visiting delegation's senior representative, a formal and easily offended man, interpreted the oversight as deliberate disrespect, his expression souring visibly as murmurs of concern began spreading among the gathered nobles who witnessed the exchange. Elena felt her stomach drop as she realized her mistake, the careful confidence she had built over recent months suddenly crumbling beneath the weight of this unexpected diplomatic misstep. She glanced toward Alaric, finding his expression carefully controlled, though she could see the concern flickering behind his composed exterior as he moved quickly to address the growing tension. Later that evening, once the gathering had concluded and the visiting delegation departed with diplomatic courtesy but clear reservation, Elena found herself alone with Alaric in their private chamber, overwhelmed with guilt and frustration at her own oversight. "I failed you tonight," she said quietly, unable to meet his eyes. "After everything you have risked for me, I embarrassed you in front of foreign delegates during an important diplomatic gathering." "Elena," Alaric said gently, taking her hands in his own, "you made a small, understandable mistake regarding an obscure custom that even some of my most experienced advisors occasionally overlook. This does not undo everything you have accomplished." "But the delegates seemed genuinely offended," Elena pressed, her voice tight with frustration. "What if this damages the negotiations? What if Lord Bennett and the others begin questioning their support of me once again?" Alaric studied her carefully before responding, his expression thoughtful rather than dismissive of her concerns. "Elena, do you remember our very first conversation in the throne room, when I asked why you spoke to me the way you did, that night at the gathering?" Elena nodded, uncertain where his question was leading. "You told me the truth, even though it would have been far easier to offer some polished excuse," Alaric continued. "That honesty is precisely what earned my respect from the very beginning. Tonight, rather than hiding from this mistake, I want you to consider addressing it directly, honestly, with the same courage you showed that very first night." Elena considered his words carefully, uncertain at first what he meant, before understanding gradually settled over her. "You believe I should apologize directly to the delegation. I believe you should approach the situation with the same genuine honesty that has defined everything admirable about your character since the moment we met," Alaric confirmed. "Formal diplomatic correction rarely resolves genuine offense as effectively as sincere, personal acknowledgement." The following morning, Elena requested a private audience with the visiting delegation's senior representative, a request that surprised palace advisors accustomed to far more formal, indirect methods of diplomatic correction. When the meeting finally took place, Elena approached the situation with complete honesty, acknowledging her oversight directly, explaining her genuine effort to understand and respect the delegation's customs, and expressing sincere regret for any offense caused by her unintentional error. The delegate, initially guarded and formal, gradually softened as Elena's genuine sincerity became increasingly evident throughout their conversation. By the meeting's conclusion, he had not only accepted her apology graciously, but expressed genuine admiration for her willingness to address the matter so directly and personally, rather than relying on formal diplomatic channels to smooth over the misunderstanding. Word of Elena's handling of the situation spread quickly throughout the palace, further strengthening the gradual respect she had been building among skeptical nobles and advisors. Even Lady Prescott, upon hearing the account, offered a rare moment of genuine acknowledgement during their next brief encounter within the palace corridors. "I confess," Lady Prescott admitted stiffly, though clearly making genuine effort, "your handling of last evening's misunderstanding demonstrated wisdom beyond what I expected." Elena accepted the compliment graciously, recognizing the significance of such acknowledgement from someone who had remained among her most persistent skeptics. "Thank you, Lady Prescott. I only tried to address the situation honestly." "Perhaps honesty proves more valuable than tradition occasionally allows for," Lady Prescott replied, before continuing on her way, leaving Elena with a small but meaningful sense of progress in her ongoing effort to earn genuine acceptance within palace walls. As months continued passing, Elena's confidence grew steadily alongside her deepening understanding of the complex world she now navigated daily. Her relationship with Alaric continued strengthening as well, their bond tested repeatedly by political pressure and public scrutiny, yet emerging stronger each time through genuine communication, unwavering support, and the same honest foundation that had defined their connection since that very first, unexpected encounter months before. Elena began to sense, with growing certainty, that whatever challenges still awaited them in the future, she and Alaric had already proven themselves capable of facing anything together. Their love strengthened rather than diminished by every obstacle they had already overcome. Nearly a year had passed since the night Elena first spilled wine upon a stranger's shoe, without knowing the crown he carried, and the palace now prepared for a celebration far greater than any formal announcement or diplomatic gathering that had come before. Word had spread throughout the kingdom that King Alaric intended to hold a grand ceremony, one that many suspected, though few could confirm, would finally settle the question that had captivated public attention for months. Elena stood once again before a mirror in her private chamber, though the woman staring back at her now carried little resemblance to the nervous, uncertain figure who had once trembled before her very first visit to the throne room. Months of challenge, growth, and unwavering dedication had transformed her, not into someone different from her true self, but into a more confident, assured version of the honest woman Alaric had fallen in love with from the very beginning. The dress prepared for tonight's ceremony surpassed even the elegant emerald gown she had worn during the formal announcement months before, crafted from deep blue silk that seemed to shift and shimmer like moonlight on water with every movement. Delicate silver embroidery traced intricate patterns across the fabric, and a matching silver ornament rested carefully within her carefully arranged hair, catching the candlelight with subtle elegance. Gareth, invited once again to witness this significant occasion, found Elena in her private chamber shortly before the ceremony began, his expression carrying a mixture of pride and disbelief as he took in her transformed appearance. "I still remember the exhausted waitress who used to complain about aching feet after long shifts," he said, shaking his head with genuine amazement. "Look at you now." Elena laughed softly, though nervousness remained evident beneath her composed exterior. "I am still that same person, Gareth, simply given the opportunity to grow into someone more than circumstances once allowed." "Whatever happens tonight," Gareth said sincerely, "know that everyone who has watched your journey these past months believes you have more than earned whatever awaits you." Elena embraced him gratefully before finally making her way toward the grand hall, where hundreds of guests had already gathered, filling the enormous space with anticipation and quiet murmurs of speculation regarding the evening's true purpose. Nobles who had once regarded her with skepticism now watched her approach with genuine respect, some even offering warm smiles as she passed through the crowd toward the raised platform where Alaric already waited. As Elena approached the platform, she noticed Lord Bennet standing near the front of the assembled crowd, offering an encouraging nod. She spotted Lady Prescott as well, her expression carrying none of the coldness from their earlier interactions, replaced instead with something closer to genuine anticipation. Even Ambassador Corwin, present as a representative of the now successfully concluded Eastern Alliance, watched with evident curiosity rather than the guarded skepticism he had once carried. Alaric stood waiting at the top of the platform, dressed in the most formal royal attire Elena had ever seen him wear, his expression carrying a depth of emotion that immediately calmed her remaining nervousness the moment their eyes met. As she climbed the final steps to stand beside him, he took her hand firmly, addressing the hushed crowd with a voice carrying both authority and genuine emotion. "1 year ago," Alaric began, his words carrying clearly across the silent hall, "I attended a private gathering disguised as an ordinary guest, curious to observe how people treat those they believe hold no power or influence over their lives. That evening, I encountered a woman whose honesty, though sharp and unfiltered, revealed a truth about her character that I have spent every day since growing to admire more deeply." Murmurs rippled through the crowd, though Elena kept her focus steady on Alaric, drawing strength from his unwavering presence beside her. "Elena Whitfield demanded that I kneel before her that evening," Alaric continued, "not knowing who I truly was, not calculating any advantage for herself, simply demanding the basic respect that every person deserves regardless of circumstance. In the months since that unexpected encounter, she has proven herself worthy of far more than simple respect. She has proven herself worthy of my heart, my trust, and my unwavering devotion. Elena felt tears gathering at the corners of her eyes as she listened to his words, overwhelmed by the depth of emotion carried within each carefully chosen phrase. "Tonight," Alaric declared, his voice growing steadier with unwavering conviction, "I do not simply wish to announce our continued courtship. Tonight, I wish to declare before this entire court, before every citizen of this kingdom, and before all those watching from neighboring lands, that Elena Whitfield will become my wife, and that she will be crowned as my queen." The hall erupted into a mixture of gasps, enthusiastic applause, and emotional murmurs as the significance of his declaration settled fully over the gathered crowd. Elena felt overwhelming emotion flooding through her chest, joy and disbelief tangled together, as Alaric turned to face her directly, kneeling before her once again, though this time the gesture carried a meaning entirely different from their very first encounter. From within his formal jacket, he produced a small velvet box, opening it carefully to reveal a ring crafted from gold and set with a single sapphire that seemed to capture the candlelight surrounding them with brilliant clarity. "Elena Whitfield," Alaric said, his voice carrying clearly across the silent hall, though the words felt intensely personal despite the hundreds of witnesses gathered around them. "Will you accept not only my heart, which you have already claimed completely, but also my crown, my kingdom, and my unwavering devotion for the remainder of our lives together?" Elena, tears now flowing freely down her cheeks, could barely find her voice through the overwhelming emotion filling her chest. "Yes," she finally managed, her voice trembling but unmistakably certain. "Yes, Alaric, I accept everything you offer, with complete honesty and unwavering love." The hall erupted into thunderous applause as Alaric rose to his feet, sliding the ring carefully onto her finger, before pulling her into a warm, genuine embrace that spoke louder than any formal declaration could have conveyed. Elena buried her face against his shoulder for a brief moment, overwhelmed by the magnitude of everything that had unfolded since that unexpected night nearly a year before. As they finally turned to face the celebrating crowd together, Elena caught sight of Lady Prescott applauding enthusiastically, her earlier skepticism completely transformed into genuine joy. Lord Bennet stood nearby, his expression carrying quiet pride as he watched the culmination of a journey he had witnessed unfold from cautious doubt into genuine admiration. Even Ambassador Corwin offered a respectful nod, acknowledging the genuine strength of character Elena had demonstrated throughout months of political complexity and personal challenge. Near the back of the hall, Gareth wiped tears from his own eyes, overwhelmed with pride at witnessing the incredible transformation of someone he had known simply as an exhausted, overlooked waitress not so very long ago. Later that evening, as the celebration continued around them, Elena found a quiet moment alone with Alaric, near the same fountain where he had first spoken to her of his mother, where their friendship had first begun deepening into something far greater than either of them had initially dared to imagine. "Do you remember?" Elena asked softly, resting her head against his shoulder as they stood together beneath the star-filled sky, "when you told me that most people who kneel before power do so out of fear or ambition?" "I remember," Alaric replied, wrapping his arm gently around her. "You said I was different," Elena continued, "because I demanded that you kneel without knowing who you truly were, without calculating any advantage for myself." "You were entirely different," Alaric confirmed, pressing a gentle kiss against the top of her head. "You remain entirely different, Elena, and that difference has become the greatest gift of my entire life." Elena smiled softly, gazing up at the stars scattered across the clear night sky, overwhelmed with gratitude for the impossible journey that had led her from that fateful spilled glass of wine to this moment, standing beside the man she loved, prepared to become not simply his wife, but his equal partner in ruling a kingdom that had slowly, gradually, learned to embrace her as one of their own. "I love you," she whispered softly, the words carrying the full weight of everything they had overcome together throughout their extraordinary year. "And I love you," Alaric replied, his voice steady with complete conviction, not despite the honesty that first drew my attention that unexpected evening, but because of it. You have taught me, Elena, that true worth has nothing to do with inherited privilege or noble bloodlines, and everything to do with genuine character, unwavering courage, and the simple, powerful strength of speaking one's truth, regardless of consequence. As the celebration continued behind them, filled with music, laughter, and genuine joy from a kingdom slowly learning to embrace an unprecedented love story, Elena Whitfield, soon to become queen, allowed herself finally, completely, to believe in the impossible, beautiful future that awaited her, a future she had never once imagined possible, on that ordinary night when a spilled glass of wine had changed the entire course of her life forever.